Eliza Orzeszkowa, The Argonauts. Every subscription helps me develop this project. Chapter 10. Darvid was astounded. He had found no time in his life to observe the new directions which thought and character were taking in the world, nor for observing the changed forms in which time molds the various generations of mankind. He was dumbfounded, speechless, and only after a while did an ironical smile appear on his lips. That lad with his theories was absurd. All that you have said is simply ridiculous. You are making a principle out of a thorough absence of principles. At your age, such opinions and such coolness are incredible. At your age, which is almost that of a child, and with your scant training, they are, out and out, ridiculous. Marion, with a quick movement, raised his head and looked with astonishment at his father. He, too, had expected something entirely different. "Ridiculous!" cried he. "What does this mean, father? This is not argument. I felt sure that we should agree perfectly. With the profoundest astonishment I see that this is not the case. How is it, my father, then, you do not take up the motto, each for himself and in his own way? Still, it is impossible for any man to carry contempt for all painted pots farther than you have carried it all your life. But perhaps this difference in our opinions is only apparent. I beg you to give me argument. The charge of ridiculousness is not argument. I may be ridiculous and be right. A lack of principles? Very well, principles form one of the most brightly painted of all pots, and therefore it is most difficult to see the clay. But never mind, I ask for a closer description. What principles do you value, father?" Darvid, with a strong quiver in his face, answered, "What? Oh, moral. Naturally, moral principles." "Yes, but I ask for an accurate definition. What are they called? What are the names of those principles?" Darvid was silent. "What are they called?" Was he up to a governess to break his head over such questions? If it were a question of law, mathematics, architecture, guilds, banks, but he had never occupied himself with morals. He had not had the time. A deep anger began to possess him, and his words hissed somewhat through his lips, when, after some silence, he added, "My dear, you have made a mistake in the address. It is not the office of a father to instill moral principles into children. That is the province of mothers. Fathers have no time for that work. Go back in memory to your childhood, recall the principles which your mother implanted in you, and you will find an answer to your question." Marion laughed. "What you say, father, reminds me of one of my friends who writes books. A poor devil, but we receive him into our set, for he has talent. That legitimizes. Well, on a time, someone asked him, 'What do you do when in writing you meet a difficulty?' 'I try to overcome it,' answered he. 'But if you can't overcome it, then I dodge, or I run to one side like a rabbit, and avoid saying that which I know not how to say.' Well, you have acted, dear father, like this author. You have dodged. Ha! Ha!" He laughed, but Darvid grew gloomier and stiffer. It was strange but true, that, in presence of that professor, he felt himself more and more a pupil. "Let us leave poor dear mamma in peace," continued Marion. "She is the impersonation of charm and sweetness. If there is still anything of this sort which for me is not a painted pot yet, it is the tenderness which I feel for mamma. She has spoken to me often indeed, and she speaks even now of principles, but the best and dearest of women is only a woman. Sentiment, routine, and besides want of logic, theory without end and practice nowhere. Is not that the case with women? You know them better than I, father, for you have had more time to explore this part of the universe." His azure eyes glittered with sparks, his golden curls fell low on his white forehead, and from his lips, shaded by a tiny mustache, the words came out with increasing boldness and fluency, and more thickly intermingled with a sarcastic smile. "As for me, were I an old maid, I should become a sister of charity, for that office has always a certain position in the world, and the stiff bonnet casts a saving shadow on wrinkles. Since I am who I am, I think thus of principles. They depend on the place, the time, the geographical position, and the evolution which society is accomplishing. If the heavens had created me in ancient Greek, my principle would have been to battle for freedom against Asiatics, and to be enamored of a beautiful boy. If in the Middle Ages, I should have fought for the honor of my lady and burnt men alive on blazing piles. In the Orient, I should possess openly a number of wives, accommodated only to my wish. In the West, Principle commands a man to pretend that he has only one wife. In Europe, it is my duty to honor my father and mother. In the Fiji Islands, it would be criminal for me not to put them to death at the proper moment. Wretched makeup, hash, with which our age does not wish now to feed itself. Our age is too old, and its palate is too practiced, not to distinguish figs from pomegranates. We children of an advanced age, decadence, know well that man may win much, but will never gain absolute truth. It does not exist. All things are relative. My only principle is that I exist and use my will. My only interest is to know how to will. Many other things might be said, but what use? Still, I will add to what is already said. You, my father, are an uncommonly wise man. You must think, therefore, just as I do. You speak differently only because people have the habit of talking in that way, to children. Darvid seemed to hear this speech out only mechanically, and when Marian, with a short and somewhat sharp laugh, pronounced the last words and was silent, the following broke from him more quickly than words had ever left his mouth before. Not true. You are greatly mistaken. I think and act differently from what you say. I have not had time to meditate over the theory of principles, but all my life has rested on one of them, on labor. Skilled in iron labor was my principle, and it has made me what I am. Pardon me for interrupting, exclaimed Marian. I beg you earnestly, but permit one question. What was the object of your labor? What was the object? That will settle everything, for a principle can be found only in the object, not in the labor, which is only the means of obtaining an end. What was your object, my father? Of course, it was not the salvation of the world, but the satisfaction of your own desires, your own, not any put on you beforehand and accepted obediently, but your own individual desires. The object of them was great wealth, a high position. Through labor you strive to acquire these, and I do not see here any principle except that which I myself possess, namely, it is necessary to know how to will. In the very essence of things we agree. Only I, with the sincerest homage, have recognized in you a master. Frequently have I thought with what perfect logic, with what unbending will, you have freed yourself from the labels which other men, even wise ones for the period, have never ceased from pasting on their persons. If in your career you had knocked against painted pots, labeled birthplace, fatherland, humanity, charity, etc., you would have gone at considerably less speed and not gone so far. But you were astonishingly logical. With amazing strength and unsparingness you have known how to will. It is from this point precisely that I looked, and I was filled with real admiration. During your absence of more than 3 years, I called you frequently, in thought, a superhuman. Friedrich Nietzsche imagined such men as you when... He stopped here, raising a glance full of astonishment at his father's face. Darvid, very pale, with quivering temples, stood up, leaned firmly on the table, and said, Enough. Unable to conceal the violent emotion which he felt, under an ironical tone and laugh, he continued, Enough of this mockery of reasoning and argument, and of all this empty twaddle. If it was your intention to pass an examination before me, I give you 5 with plus. You have fluent speech, and quite a rich vocabulary of words, but I have no time for those things, and proceed to facts and figures. The life which you are leading is impossible, and you must change. You must begin another life. He put emphasis on the word must. Marian looked at his father with an amazement which seemed to take away his speech. You have not ended your 23rd year yet, and the history of your romances has acquired broad notoriety in the world a number of times. Marian recovered from his amazement slowly. Affairs so completely personal, began he with a hesitating voice. Darvid, paying no attention to the interruption, continued, The sum which you lost in betting at the last races was, even for my fortune, considerable, 30,000. Marian had now almost recovered his balance. If this shrift is indispensable, I will correct the figures, 36,000. The suppers which you give to friends, male and female, have the fame of Lucullus feasts. Marian, with sparks of hidden irritation in his eyes, laughed. An exaggeration. Our poor Borel has no idea of Lucullus, but that he plunders us unmercifully is true. He knows how to will, threw in Darvid. Marian raised his eyes to him and said, He is making a fortune. This time, in his turn, astonishment was depicted on the face of Darvid, indignant to that degree that a slight flush appeared on cheeks generally pale. Folly! hissed he, and immediately restrained himself. You are incurring enormous debts. On what security? Marianne, at least apparently, had regained perfect confidence in himself. With eyes slightly blinking, he seemed to look at a picture on the wall. That is the affair of my creditors, said he. They must have this in view, that I am your son. But if I should wish not to pay your debts— Marianne smiled with incredulity. I doubt that. Such a smash-up as refusal to pay my debts would injure you also, my father. Besides, the sums are not fabulous. How much? I cannot tell the exact figure, but approximately they are. He mentioned figures. Darvid repeated them indifferently. About $250,000. Very good. I shall be far from ruin this time, but in future I make no reproaches, for to do so would be to lose time. What has dropped into the past is lost, but the future must be different. On the word must he laid emphasis again. With a quick movement he put his glasses on his nose, and taking a cigarette from a beautiful box, he put the end of it at the flame of one of the candles burning on the desk. He seemed perfectly calm, but behind his eyeglasses steel sparks flew, and the cigarette did not ignite, held by fingers which trembled somewhat. Turning from the desk to the table, he said, I will pay your debts at once, and the pension which 3 years ago I appointed to you, that is 6,000 yearly, I leave at your disposal. But you will leave the city 2 weeks from now, and go to— He named a place very remote, situated in the heart of the empire. In that place is an iron mill, and also glass works. In these 2 establishments I am one of the chief shareholders. You will take the office designated by the director, who is a shareholder and a friend of mine. Under his guidance and indications you will begin a life of labor. In Marianne's eyes again appeared amazement without limit, but on his lips quivered a smile somewhat incredulous, somewhat jeering. What is this to be? Asked he. Penance for sins? Punishment? No, answered Darvid. Only a school. Not a school for reasoning, for you have too much of that already, but for character. You must learn 3 things: economy, modesty, and labor. Quenching in the ash-pan the 5th or 6th cigarette, Marianne inquired, But if, perchance, I should not agree to enter that school? Darvid answered immediately, In that case you will remain here, but without means of independent existence. You will be free to live under my roof and appear at the parental table, but you will not receive a personal income of any kind. At the same time, I will publish in the newspapers that I shall not pay your debts hereafter. What I have said, I will do. Take your choice. That he would do what he had said, any man who saw him then might feel certain. The bloom on Marianne's cheeks took on a brick color, his eyes filled with steel sparks. The system of taking fortresses through famine, said he, in an undertone, and then with head inclined somewhat, and eyes fixed on the carpet, he said, I am astonished. I thought, father, that in spite of my seeing you rarely, I knew you well. Now I find that I did not know you at all. I admired in you that power of thought which was able to strike from you the bonds of every prejudice. Now I have convinced myself that your ideas are not only patriarchal, but despotic. This is a deception which pains. I wonder myself, even, that this affects me so powerfully. But in falling from heights, one must always hurt, even the point of the nose. This is one lesson more not to climb heights. I have in me a cursed imagination which leads me astray. One more mirage has vanished, one more painted pot has lost its colors. What is to be done? He said this in a low voice, biting his lower lip at times. He was pained in reality and deeply. After a while he continued, What is to be done? I must be resigned to the disappointment which has met me, but as to disposing of my person so absolutely, I protest. Had it been your intention, my father, to make a mill hand of me, you should have begun that work earlier. My individuality is now developed and cannot be pounded in through the gate of a given cemetery. To rear me as a great lord and permit, even demand, during a rather long period, that I should use all the good things of society, and be distinguished most brilliantly for your sake, and then thrust into a school of economy, modesty, and labor is, pardon me if I call the thing by its name, illogical and devoid of sequence. I might even add that it lacks justice, but I do not wish to defend myself with arguments taken from painted pots. One thing is certain, namely this, that I shall not be the victim of patriarchal despotism. He rose, took his hat from the carpet, and calmly, elegantly, but with a brick-colored flush on his cheeks and a blue, swollen vein on his forehead, he added, "I know not what I shall do. It may happen me to be the creator of my own destiny. I know how to be this, and I shall decide more readily to be a workman at my own will than at the will of another. I shall surely leave this place. Expatriation has come to my mind more than once, but not in the direction in which you have seen fit to indicate. Besides, I do not know yet, for this has fallen suddenly. I shall look into myself. I shall look around me. Meanwhile, I must go, for I have promised one of my friends to be at a certain collector's place at a given hour to examine a very curious picture. It is an original, an authentic Overbeck, a rare thing, a real find. I take farewell of you, my father." He made a low bow and went out. Exquisite elegance did not desert him for an instant. Still, in the expression of his face, and especially his excited complexion and his voice too, indignation and distress were evident in a degree which bordered on suffering. The door of the antechamber opened and closed. Darvid was as if petrified. What was this? What had happened? Was it possible that this should be the end of the conversation, and that such a conversation should end in Overbeck and a perfectly elegant bow? Wonderful man. Yes, for that was no petulant child, with childish requests, evasions, outbursts, but a premature man, almost an old man, a reasoner, a pessimist, a skeptic, a genial head. What elegance, what command of self, a princely exterior, marvelous man. What could he do with him? If he had asked for forgiveness, had promised in part even to accommodate himself to his father's wishes, even to change his life a little. But this iron persistence and unshaken confidence in himself, joined with perfect politeness, and with reason which would not yield a step. What was to be done with him? Fortresses are taken sometimes through famine, but suppose it is resolved on everything except yielding. Well, he would try, he would keep his word, he would see. A servant at the door announced, "The horses are ready." He was invited to dine at the house of one of the greatest dignitaries in the city. He would have given much to remain that day in quiet. But he had to go. In his position, with his business, to offend such a personage might involve results that would be very disagreeable. Besides, he would meet someone there whose goodwill also was necessary. He did not wish to go, but he would do violence to himself and go. Is not that the firm and strict observance of principle? What had that milksop said? That he did not recognize principles, and would not observe them? Who could treat himself more sternly and mercilessly than he? How many of the most beautiful flowers of life had he east aside? How many sleepless nights had he passed, and borne even physical toil for the principle of untiring labor, merciless iron labor? In a dress coat, his bosom covered with the finest of linen, and with glittering diamond buttons, with ruddy side whiskers, a pale and lean face, unbending, irreproachable in dress and correct in posture, he stood in the middle of his study, and was drawing on his light gloves very slowly. Taking his hat, he thought that he felt a decided sourness and a bitterness in his person, which would make the most famous dishes on the table of the dignitary ill-tasting. What was to be done? He had to go. Principle beyond all things else. When he was descending the stairway, in his fur coat and hat, he heard the rustle of silk garments on the first landing, and a rather loud conversation in English. He recognized the voices of his elder daughter and Baron Emile, but he saw Malvina first. She was in front of the young couple. With elegant politeness he pushed up to the wall so that his wife might have more room, and raising his hat with the most agreeable smile which his lips could give, he asked, "The ladies are coming from visits, of course?" There were witnesses of the meeting. Malvina, wrapped in a fur, the white edges of which appeared from under deep black velvet, answered also with a smile, "Yes, we have made some visits." But Irene, who was standing some steps lower, caught up the conversation with a vivacity unusual for her. "We are coming just now from the shops, where we met the Baron." "What are your plans for the evening?" inquired Darvid again. "We shall remain at home," answered Malvina. "How is that? But the party at Prince and Princess Zeno's?" "We had no intention," said Malvina in an attempt at self-defense, but she saw the look of her husband, and the voice broke in her throat. "You and your daughter will go to that party," said he, with a low whisper, which hissed from his lips. and immediately he added aloud, with a smile, "Ladies, I advise you to be at that party." Malvina became almost as white as the fur which encircled her neck, and at that moment Irene asked, "Will you be there, father?" "I will run in for a while. As usual, I have no time." "What a pity," said Baron Emil, "that I cannot offer you a part of mine as a gift. In this regard I am a regular Dives. And I a beggar. For this reason I must take farewell of you." He raised his hat and had begun to descend when he heard Irene's voice behind him calling, "My father!" She told her mother and the Baron that she wished to exchange a few words with her father, and ran down the steps. The splendid entrance was empty and brightly lighted with lamps, but the liveried Swiss, at sight of the master of the house, stood with his hand on the latch of the glass door. At the foot of the stairs, a tall young lady, in a black cloak lined with fur, very formal and very pale, began to speak French. "Pardon me, that in a place so unfitting, I must tell you that the ball, of which you have spoken to Kara, cannot take place this winter." Darvid, greatly astonished, inquired, "Why?" Irene's blue eyes glittered under the fantastic rim of her hat, as she answered, "Because the very thought of that ball has disturbed Mamma greatly." After a moment of silence, Darvid asked slowly, "Has your mother conceived a distaste for amusements?" "Yes, father, and I need not enlighten you as to the cause of this feeling. There are people who cannot amuse themselves in certain positions." "In certain positions? In what position is your mother?" He made this inquiry in a voice betraying a fear which he could not conceal. This thought was sounding in his head. "Can she know it?" But Irene said, in a voice almost husky, "You and I both know her position well, father, but as to this ball—" "This ball," interrupted Darvid, "is necessary to me for various reasons, and will take place in our house after a few weeks." "Oh, my father," said Irene, with a nervous, dry laugh, "je vous adresse ma sommation respectueuse, that it should not take place. Mamma and I are greatly opposed to it. Therefore, I have permitted myself to detain you for a moment, and say—" The smile disappeared entirely from her lips when she finished, "and say to you that this ball will not take place." "What does this mean?" began Darvid, but suddenly he restrained himself. The Swiss stood at the door. At the top of the stairs was another servant. So, raising his hat to his daughter, he finished the conversation in a language understandable to the servants. "Pardon me, I have no time. I shall be late. We will finish this conversation another time." When the carriage, whining on the snow, rolled along the crowded streets of the city, in the light of the street lamps which fell on it, appeared Darvid's face with an expression of terror. That pallid thin face, with ruddy whiskers and a collar of silvery fur, was visible for a moment with eyes widely open, with raised brows, with the words hanging on his lips, "She knows everything! Ghastly!" And after a while it sank again into the darkness which filled the carriage. Remember to subscribe,